Hello and welcome to my review of The Kraken Wakes by legendary British author and giant of the genre, John Wyndham, known for such sci-fi classics as Day of the Triffids and the Midwich Cuckoos, and also The Chrysalids, which was released in the USA as Rebirth. Most of those books are reviewed on this very channel, and I did enjoy them all. The Kraken Wakes was released in 1953, and given the rather more literal title of Out of the Deeps for US audiences, this was Wyndham's follow-up to Day of the Triffids. The story is narrated by a journalist called Mike in the first person, or Gerard Genet calls a homodiegetic narrator, and that he exists in the world and participates in the story. Mike works with his wife Phyllis for the English Broadcasting Company, competitors of the BBC, putting him in a place where he is privy to the government's movements and plans as the story unfolds. After a prologue in which Mike watches a massive icebergs off the English coast and decides he ought to write down how things got this bad, even if nobody would be around to read it. It'll help pass the winter, Phyllis conceded, and then perhaps when the spring comes. She let the thought tail off unfinished. The way this passage tells or foreshadows a long, bleak winter for mankind at the hand of an unseen, unknowable threat. It leaves us wondering if, not when, that spring will come. It's a tight setup, and although the passage is attributed to his wife, there is melancholy and a resigned tone to Mike's ruminations. His wife, Phyllis, comes across as the more dynamic character, and this is ably demonstrated when she gives so much advice on his yet unwritten book that it drives Mike to ask, "Whose book is this to be?" "Ostensibly yours, my sweet." "I see. Rather like my life since I've met you." The story that follows is split into 3 passages, and each details the first arrival of an unknown alien invader and then the gradual escalation of hostilities. In Phase 1, Mike and Phyllis are on a cruise to mark their honeymoon and in the right place at the right time to see the first of a series of fireballs in the sky. There are a number of these sightings over time, and although they soon lose their novelty for the general population, the 2 journalists are far more inquisitive than most, and they spot a pattern, that they always make landing over the deepest part of the ocean. When they take these findings to the powers that be, they learn that they are in fact not smarter than all of humanity, and that the government, particularly through the efforts of the outspoken scientist Bocker, is already aware of the pattern, and they learn that the fireballs have an extraterrestrial origin. Further, that the systematic nature of the activity implies an intelligent source. There is some speculation about whether the presence of another being on Earth will have any real impact on humanity, given that the alien presence, sentient or not, is confined to the uninhabitable regions, and there is good reason to believe that the surface would be equally inhospitable to them. This theme is more overtly explored in the Midwich Cuckoos, where the answer is explicitly that one species must inevitably remove the other. But here Bocker seems the more rational voice, arguing that the human response so far will only have negative consequences. This is a recurring theme in the novel. Bocker gives voice throughout to unpalatable truths, and even when privately supported, public opinion demands alternative, antithetical response. Regardless, the British launch a submersible to investigate, and it is destroyed. Both the British and American governments respond by detonating nuclear bombs, despite Bocker's assertion that the depths it can reach mean it will achieve little more than being a public spectacle. There does, however, seem to be a response from the aliens, and that shipping all over the deeps where they are known to have a presence is attacked. It takes only a few well-placed blows through design or instinct, and yet the world's economy begins to unravel in a remarkable demonstration of cause and effect. The cost of living had already risen by about 200%. The aircraft factories were working all around the clocks to produce the craft that would bring the overheads down, but the demand was so great that the schedule of priorities was unlikely to be relaxed for considerable time, possibly several years. Harbours were choked with the ships that were either laid up because the crews refused to work them, or the owners refused to pay the insurance rate. Dockers deprived of work were demonstrating and fighting for the guaranteed wages, while the unions temporised and vacillated. Seamen, out of work through no fault of their own, joined them in demanding basic pay as a right. Airport staff pressed for higher pay. Cancellation of shipyard work brought thousands more demanding continuation of pay. Aircraft workers were threatening to come out in support. Reduced demand for steel reduced the demand for coal. It was proposed to close certain impoverished pits, whereat the entire industry struck in protest. Phase 2 sees an escalation where the aliens make their first landfall in what are either vehicles or the equivalent of pressure suits, but are generally referred to as sea tanks. These tanks begin capturing humans. The reasons for this are never particularly clear, but Bocker and the others speculate that they are attempting to study us. At the forefront of the news again, Mike and Phyllis are on hand to report on the attacks, and Bocker's speculation proves accurate again when they witness one of them firsthand. As the frequencies of these attacks increase, sea defences are established. The thwarting of their mysterious plans lead the aliens to respond again in Phase 3. Here the aliens begin melting the ice caps, causing the icebergs noted in the prologue, and the rising sea levels start to flood around the world, allowing the aliens access to more and more of what was the surface. Phyllis and Mike cover the growing crisis, mostly from the EBC's London base, but despite the government's insistence that there remains a plan, more and more of the country goes dark and is cut off until it is clear that the country and civilization in general no longer exists in any meaningful way. Mike and Phyllis stay on in London for far longer than is sensible, even as most of their friends and colleagues have fled. Eventually, they decide to head to Cornwall, where they have a retreat. Their journey is not without incident, and it is clear that the country is now largely lawless and descending into similar situations to what we've seen in Day of the Triffids, or, to be honest, most of the post-apocalyptic sci-fi of this era. Still, they cling on in Cornwall for a while, and the book reaches its climax when it turns out that Bocker is alive and well, still working for what passes for the government, and that the Japanese have an anti-alien weapon, and even though the human population is dramatically reduced, the climate and economy both wrecked, all is going to be well after all. If the ending sounds unlikely to satisfy, then I exaggerate somewhat. But it remains a curious thing. The novel is unrelentingly bleak. Humanity's resolve, fragmented by Cold War tensions, is insufficient for a plausible human victory. But I thoroughly enjoyed the whole thing, finding the inscrutable aliens enthralling and Phyllis and Mike good value as characters. Mike struggles mightily with the weight of what's being done and not being done, while Phyllis is the sort of 50s heroine that authors like Robert Heinlein would like. She's clearly the more forceful and dynamic, yet knows her place, deferring to the men involved, even while subtly positioning them to see her way. The Kraken Wakes was written in the 1950s, of course, and she would likely have been quite progressive in that era, though the relationship between the two of them is just a little twee in 2025. They're still both on the right side of likeable and active throughout the crisis, and it is clear that there's a required partnership between the two, forming a solid dichotomy against the fragmented posturing of the world's governments, accentuated in the finale, where humanity's solution comes from the Japanese rather than any of the supposed superpowers. One of the criticisms of Wyndham over the years is that he writes very neat little apocalypses. The finale here does sit somewhat awkwardly on the end of a disaster on the scale of what's depicted, yet I was still reading and getting very short on pages, but I genuinely wanted a happy ending for the two leads. I don't think that Wyndham could have delivered in any other way without scuppering the whole book. Would an unhappy ending have satisfied me as a reader? Of course, we will never know, but I suspect not. The fact that there are alternative versions with slightly different endings suggests I'm not the only one with misgivings. Despite how much I liked Mike and Phyllis individually, one of Wyndham's strengths is his grasp of the broader strokes of humanity. Mike and Phyllis essentially work propaganda, towing the safe line to avoid agitating a people, yet battling the system and themselves at times to ensure that the correct truths do come out. Yet for those of us who are the COVID generation, or at least those of us able to recognise misinformation in all its forms, there's something very real about the Cold War paranoia interfering with people's recognition of the real threat. There are numerous examples of this in the book, with one particular critic observing, "The whole thing's a lot of bloody eyewash, that's why. Things in the frickin' deeps, for Christ's sake. Horse Marines, Dan Dare and bloody Martians. We lose ships, the Yanks lose ships, the Japs lose ships, but do the Russians lose ships? Do they hell? And I'd like to know why not." And when it's pointed out that the Russians too have been losing their ships, and though smothered by their own propaganda had also acknowledged as much publicly, the truth is irrelevant in the face of misinformation. That's just the kind of camouflage you would expect from them. The only difference here is the mode of delivery, the great British pub rather than social media. What a difference 70 years of politics can make. Yet when Russian saber-rattling at a threat no more tangible than a bank of fog prompts a response from Western governments that pulls much-needed resources away from combating the threat in the deep, Mike observes, "There are times when one fails to see why God thought it necessary to devise the ostrich." If humanity is depicted in a way that feels a little depressingly too real, the aliens remain entirely other. Even at the end, there is no suggestion of what they look like or whether their actions were entirely method or instinct. Mike's observation at the beginning remains entirely true at the finale. Even now, years later, though I'm certain enough in my own mind that this was the beginning, I can still offer no proof that it was not an unrelated phenomenon. What the end that will eventually follow the beginning may be, I prefer not to think too closely. I would also prefer not to dream about it either, if dreams were within my control. And although the book starts with a poem from Tennyson, this section is more Lovecraftian in that the menace or monster is beyond our understanding, our ability even to reference, the stuff of nightmares made real, and with a scope and power few can comprehend. Japanese science prevails here. Is the stranger that arrives at the cottage with rumours of humanity's victory only parroting further propaganda? One of the differences between the US and UK version is the UK's finale is apparently more upbeat, yet when Bocker himself delivers the news in the US version and has been established as the teller of often brutal truths throughout the novel, it becomes more tangible. Overall, with Wyndham's usual standards of apocalypse raised by a foe truly alien in thought and deed, The Kraken Wakes is a great read. The tension ratchets up gradually and plausibly, always one notch above any response the characters of the novel can muster. Indeed, as journalists, they are aware of much but only able to battle ineffectively on the fringes, a localised image of the broader picture, as varying priorities and political manoeuvres prevent too many obstacles for a unified response. The two leads are likeable to the extent that with barely a handful of pages to go, and recognising that a happy ending would be implausible, I was still hoping for one. What Wyndham delivers on that score is almost good enough. I still recommend The Kraken Wakes very highly. Thanks for watching. As always, if you want to help me out, then like and subscribe and consider buying one of my books on Amazon. Here's a trailer.
My name is Riley and I'm a student. The first 2 weeks at Sexington University were perfectly normal. I was drunk until the end of freshers when my student loan ran out. Then Professor Lovecraft exploded his lab and my eyebrows and everything changed. My roommate started dying. Aliens invaded. I killed a dragon over breakfast, got stranded in the past and attacked by dinosaurs. I might have committed a genocide. I might have robbed an empire. I may even have saved the world. I really hope next week is quieter. I have an assignment due.